Welcome to Notes from Underground. I'm Jareth Kopis. We're going to be turning our attention to the coronavirus, specifically the exceedingly detailed and researched works of Sergei Kurginyan, the founder of the tremendously popular Russian movement called Essence of Time. This movement has been gaining popularity worldwide for its straight-talking, honest approach to current issues, and its willingness to defend its word with actions, this evidenced by it having its own volunteer unit fighting against the Ukrainian Fascists in Donetsk. This series put up by Kurginyan is called Coronavirus, its goals, authors, and masters. Regardless of your stance on the virus, you're going to want to pay attention. I'm going to be hitting on a few of the key points discussed in these extremely detailed and in-depth reports. The full articles can be found at the Essence of Time website, and the complete video can be found on the Essence of Time International YouTube channel. Both of these are provided in the description below. One of the main points covered in this first installment is the massive amounts of misinformation, whether it be direct or indirect, that everyone across the globe is being fed. This including the stories about miracle cures, extreme stories of people being locked inside their homes like prisoners, and the tales of governments implanting chips into your brain.
Well, what can I say about this? First of all, if some scammer wants to sell a coronavirus medication, while in fact such a medication doesn't exist, then this scammer must be exposed and called to account. No objections here. Secondly, if deliberately false information about doors welded shut is distributed with provocative goals, then this too must be stopped. No questions here either. Thirdly, a truly sensitive question exists about phobias associated with excessive technical control over the inhabitants of the world. There is no doubt that many are striving for this control. There's also no doubt that everything concerning the capacity of such control and everything that follows needs to be divided into what is real and not very impressive and what's made up. Subsequently, one then has to say that, for now, many capabilities are imaginary. No one is going to stick a chip or a nanochip into your brain tomorrow because they can't. They want to, and given how the socio-political processes and the trends are developing now, they will certainly do it to your grandchildren.
You must force yourself to look at the coronavirus as a much larger picture than just a disease. We must explore how it's being used against us and the ever-present threat of techno-dehumanization. This becoming a main thread of discussion in the work of Kurginyan, focusing on how one cannot be overcome by these fears, but instead can shine light on these fears instead of cowering from them. We have seen these things before. The Nazis were convinced that natural selection was incapable of removing undesirable DNA and set out on their own twisted science experiment of manipulation of their own. It is clear that all these attempts to manipulate humanity are nothing new. The emphasis needs to be put on reining in the two opposite camps that work in tandem towards these goals. On the one side is those pushing the fear, and on the other are those who are so consumed by this fear that it turns them into mindless masses that are easily manipulated into subhuman beings.
You might ask me if I believe that some vaccines today can program a person's consciousness by including various kinds of nanoparticles or nanochips in their composition. No, I don't believe that. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe not, but I don't believe that. And not because I consider whichever elite, ours or the international elite, to be incapable of such human rights violations. I think all these elites are capable of anything. I just don't believe that right now the elite is able to technologically implement this anti-utopia. But tomorrow, the possibilities of science and technology will become greater. And then, why not? Moreover, His Majesty fear always lies at the basis of these kinds of harnessing people and turning them into controllable machines. This already happened at the beginning of the 21st century in connection with the attack on the Twin Towers and all that followed. It was called the War on Terrorism. Who knows how many people there are who'd like to, under any pretext, to carry out such a desirable selling of mankind by a certain elite that could technocratically rule everything in the world, including thoughts. Does the presence of such desires mean that any phobias should be nourished and amplified? Of course not. This should never be done, especially in acute situations. But you can't just yell the phobias away. They're restrained in a different way. Not only in a more flexible and smart way, but most importantly with trust, persuasion, and evidence. And not by the principle of now we'll ban everything and have heaven on earth.
As you can see, this goes much deeper than just the pandemic. The roots of the pandemic are as important as any aspect. Is it man-made? Is it Chinese? Is it American? Is it from bats or from monkeys? The list goes on. Kurginyan goes on to address many of these, including China's role, but you don't get just one side. You get a look into all the narratives being pushed.
On May 2nd, 2020, the Chinese newspaper People's Daily, which plays a more important role than the newspaper Pravda did in 1970, very sharply rebuts U.S. accusations against China, which the U.S. says is to blame for humanity's problems because of the coronavirus. People's Daily suggests that the United States answered 10 questions related to the coronavirus pandemic and the U.S. role in this pandemic. I will list these questions, for this is very serious. I'll just quote People's Daily. Number 1. Regarding the restarted avian influenza virus modification experiment last year, why does the U.S. release no updates? What is it all about? What does the People's Daily ask? About artificial viruses and experiments on virus modification. 2. The United States Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Disease, U.S. SAMRID, was previously closed. What is the truth behind this? Isn't it because there were some leaks? Isn't that what they mean? 3. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services ran a scenario last year that was similar to the COVID-19 outbreak. Is this just a coincidence? Commenting on the statement, People's Daily writes that this question is being asked because the New York Times had quoted a report in March that members of the U.S. government received. The report said that from January to August 2019, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services worked on a scenario codenamed Crimson Contagion, which simulated a fictional outbreak involving a group of tourists who visited China and became infected with a new virus and then scattered it into different countries, including the United States. Remember this name, Crimson Contagion. This is not a conspiracy theory. It's an official Chinese reference to an official U.S. document. In this scenario, People's Daily writes, a fictitious CAPS virus was introduced. It caused more serious symptoms than the real coronavirus, and it was also transmitted through the respiratory tract like the regular flu. In addition, it has also caused a pandemic, as was the case with SARS. The scenario also stipulated there was no vaccine against CAPS. 4. U.S. intelligence officials warned of coronavirus crisis as early as last November. Why was the warning ignored? Despite these warnings, the People's Daily writes, a state of emergency in the United States was declared only on March 13th of this year. 5. Among the reported influenza cases in the U.S., can the U.S. clarify how many cases are actually infected with COVID-19? 6. When did the novel coronavirus first appear in the U.S.? Did community transmission of the coronavirus start sooner than it was reported? 7. How did the U.S. get the virus strain so soon to start the first human testing on a vaccine against COVID-19? 8. Why did the U.S. government keep downplaying the pandemic while its officials privately dumped stocks? 9. Why are U.S. experts not allowed to discuss COVID-19 in public? This is reported by People's Daily. Can you hear me? You can think of it as simply dictated by Xi Jinping or discussed at the Politburo. 10. What research is being done in the U.S. overseas biological laboratories? Why does the U.S. keep tight-lipped about it?
In these questions alone, a great deal of subjects are brought to light that are still today not being addressed. Most of these Kurginyan himself discusses in further detail in later installments. One of the most troubling being the Crimson Contagion scenario discussed in official U.S. governmental documentation. I sincerely urge you to check out the full first installment in either article or video form. My brief few minutes only touch on the hour-long video's content. I leave you today with a guarantee. If you are brave enough to walk the path of bringing war to the war makers, you will never travel this path alone.